Yeah, just saying.
Welcome to Tarot for the Soulless Materialist, a podcast where we ask the question, how can we make our readings more dialectical, with the corollary question of how can we feel good about the work that we do. It is my great privilege to introduce Dr. Amy Hale. Amy, do you want to tell us about the work that you do and what makes you feel good about it?
Well, first, Ted, thank you so much for inviting me to be on today. I think this is a very cool idea for a podcast. And, I think I fit Soulless Materialist quite well. So I'm delighted to be here. So the work that I do, I'm fortunate enough right now to be a full-time writer. And I do essays and books and cultural criticism and art criticism and all of that now. That is backed up off of 20 years doing variously academic things, running from teaching courses in humanities and anthropology online to doing consulting, consulting for the higher ed industry, particularly on online course development and curriculum development. But I was fortunate enough a few years ago to be able to retire from that field and to spend some time focusing on my writing. So I kind of feel like I'm playing a lot of catch-ups. And what do I like about it? I like that I finally feel that I'm able to concentrate on the things that really give me joy and that I can engage with very passionately. Higher education was it ended up being a little too challenging and painful for me to be doing full time. So I'm glad to be able to do this right now, and I'm exceptionally fortunate, and I'm reminded of that every day.
As a refuge from the academy myself, I'm thinking about how I've got, like 100 writing projects that one of these days I will be, when I can dedicate my full time to writing, catching up with. Dr. Amy Hale is a scholar who works on modern Druidry and the Surrealist painter Ithell Colquhon. And my first question, since I don't want to lose my audience who's interested in tarot, and I'm putting you on the spot with this one. I realize it wasn't in our chat beforehand, but in modern Druidry, is the tarot an element like the way that it sometimes is in modern witchcraft?
So it's really funny that you mentioned modern Druidry and my relationship to it is because my relationship to it is actually virtually zero. Now, you're not the first person to have made this mistake, because I do write about it in some of my biographies. And I have written about modern Druidry. I've written mostly about what's called ethnic Druidry. So things like the Welsh Gorseth, the Cornish Gorseth. And that tends to be what my focus has been. But of course, Ithell Colquhon was very involved in spiritual Druidry. And that was really her, one of her many different spiritual paths. So I'm not really an expert on what modern Druids do, but I'll say this. What I do know is that modern Druidry is exceptionally eclectic. And there are some Druids who feel very focused on doing things that they feel are part of their cultural inheritance. They're very attracted to Celtic and British ways of practice. And then there are other Druids who might see themselves more in a following Slavic paths or Indo-European, doing Indo-European work or Buddhist work. So obviously, I think that within, like with witchcraft or contemporary occult practice or contemporary esoteric practice, of course, tarot is going to find a home, because tarot is so versatile and so kind of multivalent that practitioners who I think are on a variety of spiritual paths are going to find that tarot finds a home in their practice. So while I can't speak as an expert on contemporary Druidic practice, I would put really good money on the fact that there are a lot of Druids out there who are also working with tarot.
Interesting. Yeah, I think the eclecticism point is a good one, and I'm glad that I can, rely for kind of theoretical support from my expert guests as I stumble across this material and kind of try and articulate my questions about it. And often, so I'm thinking about, you've written about neopaganism, you've written about reconstruction, right? So would we say that modern Druidry is necessarily a reconstruction? Is it always a reconstructionist neopaganism? Is it sometimes something else? Same thing about Wicca or the Golden Dawn, right? Like, where are we at in terms of how we theorize these new religious movements?
That's an excellent and a very broad question. Given in my opinion as a scholar, given that we don't really know very much at all about what Druids did or what, frankly, ancient Celts did. And I also just want to clarify that when we talk about ancient Celts, we're not talking about a uniform group of people or practices. That would be kind of like saying English speakers or Spanish speakers or Chinese speakers. That there are a whole bunch of different people who fit and have fit under the title of Celtic. So we shouldn't ever assume that what any one of them did in the past was something that any other Celt was doing in the past. So I think that there are a lot of people today who take different approaches to the idea of reconstruction. There are a lot of people who use a variety of literary sources and historical or classical sources, and to try to piece together something that they feel is very true to what people were doing, to particularly pre-Christian or pre-contact practice with Christians. I think that there are others who take a much more fluid and creative approach, and they realize that there is maybe inspiration from ancient times and pre-Christian times, but that they're engaged in something that's perhaps more creative and more suited to contemporary practices in the modern religious and spiritual landscape. So I think that there might be a lot of people out there who are doing, say, Celtic reconstruction or any kind of cultural reconstruction, who feel that they are getting at something that for them speaks to a sense of authenticity. I tend to think that authenticity is a kind of problematic concept because it's very problematic. It's slippery. There is no authentic anything. I hate to say it. There's just no, there is no real one source that has been stuck to throughout time for really anything. I mean, there might be an original, but everything changes every time we do something. It's different, right? So, I think that there are people who they take different approaches to reconstruction, the idea of reconstruction.
So, I'm playing hooky right now to do this interview from the Applied Arts of Alchemy conference, where I just asked Jenny Rampling about her book, which is all about how English alchemists were kind of reinventing alchemical tradition as they received these texts, but were reading them in terms of like, the new materials, new theories, and whatever. And I asked the question like, well, doesn't this happen in every era, right? In every era of whatever esoteric tradition, these texts are being received by people in a new context, and there's always going to be this kind of, what Harold Bloom called a creative misreading potential there. And one of the things I value about your work is that it helps me with a lot of these questions, and especially, I forget if I got the term from you or from somewhere else, but this idea of the broom closet in academia, right, where scholars who study Western esotericism are often, I'm not going to say necessarily practitioners, but willing to kind of do experimental work with their own bodies and minds, and actually try putting this stuff into practice as maybe as part of their personal work or as part of their scholarly enterprise. And we don't always talk about this broom closet, right? The practitioner scholar and these weird spaces in between practitioner and scholar, which brings me to my question. I'd love to hear you talk some more about the independent scholar label, right? When I go to a conference and I introduce myself as an independent scholar without institutional support, people shake my hand and they're just kind of like, right? They act as if, I think you said in your interview recently with Cunning Folk magazine, they act as if there's something wrong with you. And I'm also thinking, and pardon the paragraph long question, I'm also thinking about how tarot readers are a certain kind of scholar themselves, although outside of the academy. So where are you at with being an independent scholar?
Yeah, I think you're right. That being an independent scholar has a stigma that a lot of people won't admit to. I think actually where I really addressed this was in an interview with Ethan Doyle White not too long ago, and and he raised the question to me about whether or not I thought that, what I thought about the term independent scholar and the role of independent scholars, particularly in esoteric and neopagan academic circles. And I'm not sure what he was hoping I would say. He might have been hoping that I would say, oh, we can totally stick it to the man. But in fact, independent scholars can. And first of all, and it depends on what you want to do as an independent scholar. It depends on how you importantly see your relationship to academia and academic production. Now, personally, I'm pretty lucky in the sense that I have had a long career working within an academic framework. I have had institutions and institutional support. I've been able to get grants for my work. And so I have been able to establish myself reputationally as somebody who can kind of, even sort of play in that area. So my withdrawal from it has not been too damaging for me, because there's a lot of stuff that I am rejecting in the position that I am taking. So that gives me a lot more luxury. But a lot of independent scholars and people who are unaffiliated, they perhaps want to be working more closely within academic circles, and there might be more that they need from academic affiliations that are completely and utterly closed off to them. So you can't get grants, you can't necessarily access academic libraries and academic research. It's hard for you to go to conferences because you may not have the support, although frankly, even tenured folks are not getting the support for conferences that they used to.
Yeah.
So, and so if you're trying to, like, as you said, if you're trying to write and engage in academic discourse and academic production, and you are so busy doing something else that you can't even keep up your research profile to be competitive, being an independent scholar, aside from the stigma, I think that it's not always a helpful title. I don't think that it reflects where people are. And one of the things that I said in that piece that I think is really important, I am not a fan of the language of plan A and plan B when it comes to people's relationships with academia. I think we need to stop talking about having other jobs outside the academy as plan B. We need to stop stigmatizing people who are not in the professorate, because a lot of people don't want to be in the professorate. I never wanted to be in the professorate. I found myself teaching totally by accident. And a lot of people don't want to make that choice, but they're still in the position to produce absolutely fantastic work. And I think we need to recognize that. And I think that when we go into scholarly spaces, that there needs to be more engagement with people who are choosing to have different paths, yet are producing work that is solid. That's what the peer review process is supposed to be about. The peer review process isn't supposed to be, who do you work for? It should be, oh, hey, that's really good work. And that's the kind of thing that I'd like to see happen.
Yeah, and I hope to have more conversations, kind of everybody I invite on this show, on the difficulty of doing this sort of work. I remember when I was a grad student and still thinking in terms of like within the academy, it was hard enough just to explain to my advisor why I want to work on this weird Renaissance magician guy. It's hard enough with the support to kind of sell an esoteric topic. I mean, it's easier nowadays, 15 years later, right? But back in the day when we were getting started in this kind of work, it was really hard to kind of just like explain what you're doing without people thinking you were really weird, or you must be kind of some crypto occultist, right? You must, and that comes back to the broom closet question as well, right? Suspecting that you must be like a cultist, right? I want to talk on the subject of labor about all of the work that was involved in the amazing archival research that you did in your discovery of Ithell Colquhon.
I have to say that the story of doing that research over a very long period, as it intersected with a lot of the changes and transitions of my own life, was it was an amazing story. You know, first from the very first discovery of her, when outside Cornwall she was virtually unknown. She's kind of a footnote for some of the surrealist scholars, and occultists knew who she was, especially older ones who might have seen a lot of her publications and things like the alchemical, was it the Hermetic Journal, the beautiful one that was done by Adam McLean in the 70s and 80s. It was really good. So people might, and Wood and Water, people might have been familiar with her from some of those, and of course, the Sword of Wisdom. So, when I first discovered her, I mean, it's not like I discovered her under a rock or something. People did know who she was, and she was remarkable. It was, trying to. I was living over there and working at the Institute of Cornish Studies, which is part of the University of Exeter. So I was actually part of an academic department when I first started that research. But then over the 20 years following, I came back to the States. Things were challenging. I took on a lot of work teaching. And by a lot of work teaching, I mean a lot of work teaching. And so being able to get back and forth to the UK to do my research was really hard. Of course, it would have been so much easier had I been over there and could have dipped into, everything that I wanted to. But I worked very hard and actually chose teaching in the way that I did online so that I could go back to the UK and finish that work. So I would go over there, spend all day in the Tate, and then be teaching at my friends Clive and Kate's house until 2 or 3 in the morning, and then get up and do it again. And yeah, it was absolutely remarkable. And there were so many challenges and delays because, of course, access was difficult. The copyrights were difficult. And then this kind of amazing cultural thing happened where suddenly people were starting to discover her work. And this, I think, happened largely because of the exhibition that happened in Cornwall, the Dark Monarch exhibition in 2009. And I had initially planned to publish, or hoped to publish, this book 10 years before I did. It wouldn't have been nearly as good a book had I done that, but it wasn't time. And this is where, if I want to not be quite as much the soulless material, if I want to look at, maybe synchronicity a little bit and talk about the hand of fate or the hand of Ithell, I think that when the book came out, it was the right time for the book to come out, because it was seizing on all of these different currents. Like you were saying, it's not quite as weird now. People are realizing that the occult and the esoteric, that it's important to people. It has shaped histories, it has shaped art, it has shaped politics and thought, and continues to do so. And that it's not weird and marginal. It's actually central to a whole bunch of things. Magic has never gone away. And because of that openness, the reception for her work has just been remarkable. So yeah, it was a story.
So the interested listener can read more about this in your article, "The Occult Has Been Here All Along," which was like a web article, right? And also about the archival research in the Ithell book. Can you tell us a little bit about what was the state of the archives when you came across them, and like how exactly are you getting your hands dirty working with this material?
Well, there were 2 different archives, which at first were very dirty hands indeed. So the first archive was her material that was in the Tate, which in 2000 was uncatalogued. So when I first went in and I phoned them up, and their archive system was very different than the actual building. And I said that I wanted to see this, and they're like, yeah, okay, sure, it's on catalog, but we'll bring it out to you. And they just wheeled all of these boxes out to me on this rolling pallet, and they're like, all right, here's some gloves, have at it. And I was seeing, the first thing that I encountered was the occult material. I was like, oh my God. And then I was seeing letters between, on my first day, I saw letters between Ithell Colquhon and Doreen Valiente, and I just could not get over myself. I was like, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. So, and I spent the whole week just digging into this, making every note that I possibly could. And I went back to my office and I'm like, oh my God, boss.
I'll interrupt you for a second just to note, it's not just the work of kind of like organizational linguistics and the eye-burning work of reading everything, but also the work of being in awe of the material that you have just found, right?
Oh yeah, I think that is something that is common to pretty much anybody who gets to do archive work. And I'm very fortunate that even though I don't work on medieval texts, I'm not even remotely a medieval linguist, but I've had the opportunity to go and see the text, the original text of the Ordinalio, which is a Cornish language text from the 14th century. And there's just something about seeing and being in the space of an artifact like that is just staggering. I've been in the presence and been, had somebody hand me a 10th century manuscript, and just, there's nothing like it. There's just something that is still, to me, awe-inspiring and awe-producing about those moments. And so here I was, just surrounded by these things that was just like, just mind-blowing when I encountered it. And it felt like such a gift. And I wasn't able, because of funding, et cetera, I wasn't able to get back to it. And then they cataloged it. And then, of course, going back to the Tate and going back now, even, I mean, it's remarkable. They have its catalog. They've got a bunch of people there who are not only, I'm so grateful for them every day, because they know the archive now, they know the material. Some of them know me. I still work with them because I'm still doing Ithell work. And I cannot say enough good things about the wonderful people at the Tate. The National Trust was a very different situation, because when Ithell willed her material to the National Trust at the end of her life, her will is just a nightmare. And I think she'd kind of given up. It's really sad, because if you keep your entire archive of everything you've produced, every little scrap of paper since your teen years, either you're a complete hoarder or you believe you have a legacy. I believe that Ithell Colquhon always felt that she had a legacy. She always wanted, I believe, that recognition and the recognition she deserved. But at the end of her life, when she made her will, she's like, all right, fine, I'm leaving everything to the National Trust and they can sell it and buy land in Cornwall. And I'm very grateful that that ended up never happening. But they don't deal with surrealist art. They're a conservation organization. So they stuck it in a shed in Cornwall. 5,000 pieces of art were just kind of shuffled around, mostly in Cornwall and then later on in Devon, and people didn't know what to do with them. And finally in 2019, it was given to the Tate, and the Tate now handles all of her archive and her copyright, which is wonderful. But during the time that I went to the National Trust, it was being able to get there, being able to make an appointment, trying to find a space for it, trying to get images of it, because they just weren't set up for it. And so, until recently, very few of her works from her entire corpus had actually ever been seen. And I was seeing that there were all of these things in all of these writings, and I was seeing corresponding images that she was doing. So, but they were bilocated. So one of my hopes is that now that they're in the same place, that people can start to bring these things together in a way that will be so much more illuminating about her work. But yeah, it was magical. I mean, all of it was magical. That research was incredible.
I mean, it sounds magical, and I'm also thinking about the stress that having these magical energies run through your body, kind of puts on the laborer. It also sounds you know, stressful, just like dealing with like all of this like difficulty. And I mean, gosh, just finding all of these works out in a shed, and have they been taken care of? And you know, I just my eyes are just bugging out of my skull. So you know, my listeners are going to be interested in Taro As Color, which is a book that you have written the introduction to. Tell us about Ithell's approach to the tarot in that book.
That was, I mean, a lot of the work that I've done with Ithell Colquhon is actually, and continues to be, kind of decoding what she was doing. She never wrote anything for a beginner ever. And her tarot cards were, I think, perhaps the first, what we would call abstract deck produced. She produced them in 1977. They were done, they were exhibited, they were completed and displayed in a small gallery in Newlyn in Cornwall, which is just between Mosul and Penzance. It's a beautiful little gallery. It's absolutely wonderful. It's not that little, it's great. But you know, so she produced these and she put them in several different frames, kind of slammed together. And then she had this introductory essay, which is also in the book. And yeah, I can only imagine what people were thinking, especially if they knew anything about tarot, because these looked unlike any other tarot deck. They were not figurative. The titles, unless you know the Golden Dawn tarot titles, which most people don't, they were probably impenetrable. And then reading her description of them, again, unless you know a lot about Golden Dawn tarot and Kabbalah, probably not going to get a lot out of it. So, you know, as an art exhibit, it was probably kind of maybe weird and edgy. It's hard to know. I would love to know what the reception was at the time. But her deck is based around, I wouldn't say exactly Golden Dawn color schemes in the sense that the Golden Dawn tarot, like if you read book Z, you're not going to get images in Ithell Colquhon's tarot that reflect the imaging and the system of the Golden Dawn tarot as it was taught internally and those internal documents. You will not be seeing that. What you will be seeing are predominantly Kabbalistic and elemental pieces that are designed to bring the viewer into the internal spirit of each card. She, over her life, she went through, I think probably like a lot of people, she went through maybe some changes in how she viewed tarot. She worked with it in obviously a number of capacities, just like, you know, any good occultist. But toward the end of her life, she really wanted this to be a focus of contemplation, not of divination. She took the view that divination, and I think this is one of the inherent tensions that we get in tarot, in modern tarot, is, well, you know, you're not supposed to do anything debasing with it like divination, but if you have to, here's how you do it. And she really rejected that entirely. She wanted people to get to know these cards as entities and to understand them through the medium of very intense color. And that was really her project with those. And they came toward the end of her life. So they were, I think, this incredible culmination of her surrealist skill with automatic processes and of her ideas about color and Golden Dawn theory and how Golden Dawn used very pure ideas of color. And we have this really incredible synthesis of all of those principles in that deck.
So one other Ithell Tarot and Golden Dawn correspondences and Kabbalah question, you know, we're very interested here in the Sephirotic attributions to the tarot, right? And, you know, sometimes the 1 to 10 cards get correlated with the 10 Sefirot of the Tree of Life and the Kabbalah. Can you tell us a little bit about the Deckhead of Intelligence?
Yes, that is, I have always seen that as a companion piece. And it's clear when you look at the two that it was a companion piece. So I have a hypothesis about how these works were generated, because if you see them, they have some stylistic similarities, the tarot deck and the Decad of Intelligence. And the Decad was produced in 78, 79, and the tarot cards were produced in 77. And I have this hypothesis that toward the end of her life, she was starting to think again about extra dimensional spaces and how you would contact and go between this world and other worlds. And that these pieces of art were perhaps a focus for her in trying to express some of this using color. So the Decad of Intelligence, it is a series of 10 pieces representing the 4 worlds of color for each of the Sephirah. And I think she does them, I mean, because if you read the color schemes of each of the 4 worlds, they sound kind of weird. It's like, you know, and there are a lot of ways in which they have been rendered, obviously, like, you know, gold flecked white, and you know, there are a lot of ways to think about how these go together, but she presents them the way that I kind of try to imagine that what she was getting across with both the tarot deck and the Decad of Intelligence is that you're kind of lying on your back, and each of the Sephirah are kind of coming down, and you're experiencing them as kind of cross sections of spheres that are illuminated in each of the 4 worlds. And that's what I think that she was doing, certainly with the tarot. The Decad, the text, the accompanying text, they're, again, meditative. They're supposed to be meditations on the Sephiroth. They're not for active use, really. They're to teach you. I think that there's a didactic element to them, because the attributes of each of the Sephirah are placed next to the images, at least in the book that I did with Folger for this. And I think that each of the Sephirah has a bit of a, I tend to think a bit of a vulvic quality to it, because the Golden Dawn saw the Sephiroth as receptive, as feminine in nature. And I think that her work also kind of characterizes that, maybe a little Georgia O'Keeffe, maybe I'm projecting, I don't know. But yeah, so that's I think part of the relationship between these 2 projects.
There's a bit of sexual magic in Ithell Colquhon, and you know, I'm thinking about the portrayal of sexual magic in the Crowley Thoth tarot that is the you know, one of the haunts of our show. And so first of all, could you tell us a little bit about Ithell's kind of startling and unusual depictions of sexual magic in her work?
Sure. And so, you know, kind of going back to my archival experiences when I was first encountering her work in the National Trust, I was there and I had some tables and I was surrounded by these envelopes, and you know, they kept putting these portfolios in front of me to kind of go through, because these were completely uncatalogued. Well, not completely, but they weren't organized in a specific way. And I opened them up, and one of the first ones that I look at, I'm seeing some pretty explicit material. And I identified it as a sex magic corpus right away. I wasn't prepared for how much of it there was. In the book, there are a couple of really polished pieces that I think get to the core of what she was trying to do. But in terms of the erotic imagery in her corpus, particularly during, I think, the years of 1939 and 1941 is when we see the heaviest concentration of her working with ideas of sexual magic. And I tend to think that her work is different than what we see in a lot of the Western sex magic corpus. First of all, there are homoerotic images, but it's a combination of alchemical symbolism and Kabbalistic symbolism. So she was definitely dealing with the idea of the male, the female, and the resolution. And so a lot of times these were signified by colors of Hokmah and Bina in the king scale. So, but I think she also modified the king scale a little bit to get a little bit more brilliance to those colors. So we have kind of a crimson and a blue that come together and merge to this purple, because purple for her, purple and white were symbolic of the state of the hermaphroditic state, the perfected state of union that two people or that one person would encounter when they were able to unify the opposites, either through a sexual act or perhaps possibly internally with their own spiritual work. But was she doing, I mean, I don't see this. I mean, I have not found anything where she wrote about what she was trying to do explicitly, but I'm not convinced that she was using any kind of necessarily highly gendered active passive model. She certainly would not have seen the woman as the vessel for any kind of magical homunculus that we might see, say, in the Lover's card in the Crowley deck, in the Thoth deck. So I don't think that that's the dynamic that she was trying to suggest. I think possibly there were qualities, particular qualities that people could, she definitely believed that there were there were places on the body where energy could be exchanged. It's kind of a theosophical notion. Obviously, you see it there, but her version of it was Kabbalistic. And so a lot of her sex magic images would have two figures trying to meet up at various points on the body so the energy could be exchanged through them. And I'm not convinced that she felt that this was something that needed to be restricted to a woman and a man, because she had homoerotic, she had same-sex attraction, we know that. So, what she was trying to do, I'm not sure, but I don't think it fits cleanly into a model that we see in other systems.
She depicted men with male angels, have I got that right?
Oh yeah, oh yeah.
Fascinating. Yep. So we are at the limit of what Zoom is going to allow us to record. Do you want to keep talking, and do you have more time? I can, let me stop it here.